Hi. Hope you had a delightful Christmas. This week, if you've tuned in already, if not, catch up on the back videos. I'm doing a series of history videos all week, chronicling the beginning of the United States. It begins with the emergence of parties that I did about 2 weeks ago. On Monday, I did one about the opening years of Washington's second term. Yesterday, I did one about the closing years of Washington's second term. And now I'm getting up to John Adams' administration. We're about 1796 or 97. Jefferson ran for president against John Adams in the election of 1796 and almost won. Adams beat him by 2 electoral votes. And Jefferson, in accordance with the law of that period, became the vice president. He got the second most votes, so he was the vice president. Adams's term in office was filled with the most incredible, vicious, partisan rancor we've ever had. One of Adams's problems was that he really didn't treat the presidency, a new administration, as being a departure. He just saw it as, we change the president, we'll keep the government. So he kept all of Washington's cabinet. And by that point, most of Washington's cabinet was controlled by Alexander Hamilton, who hated John Adams. They were both Federalists, but there was a real personal animosity between the two of them, as you'll see in a minute. And as such, Hamilton was really running the country, and Adams, as president, was increasingly powerless. But the big shadow that hovered over the U.S. in that 4-year period was the threat of war with France. We'd signed the Jay Treaty, which in effect allied us with Britain, and now Britain and France were fighting a world war, and there was a serious chance of the United States going to war with France. And Adams knew that we were not prepared for it militarily. But Adams had a more significant concern. He was worried about Alexander Hamilton becoming a dictator. He felt that we should not have a standing army, because he felt if we had one, there would be the constant threat of a coup d'etat and a takeover by the military, as had happened to the Roman democracy back in the era before Christ. And he was very much afraid of that. He knew that if we went to war, Washington would have to be the general-in-chief. He'd be called back into service. But he knew that Washington was getting really old and that he'd delegate the conduct of the war to Hamilton, just as he had putting down the Whiskey Rebellion. And Adams was terrified that Hamilton would use that to seize power and become a dictator. And by the way, he was right. The subsequent writings of Hamilton that have come out indicate that at the close of his life, that was exactly what he was hoping to do. So, in an effort to stop the war with France, Adams sent 3 American ambassadors to France, including John Marshall, the future Chief Justice, to negotiate a treaty. And Talleyrand was the foreign minister of France, and he was an absolutely corrupt official. He was like the role model of corruption, allegedly a cardinal, but in fact a thief. And he said, I'm not going to negotiate with you until you pay me a bribe. If you pay me a bribe, I'll negotiate with you. If not, you can rot away in Paris and I won't even receive you. Well, the Americans would not pay the bribe and then leaked the fact of the solicitation of the bribe by 3 French agents named X and Y and Z. Their names we assigned them. So the XYZ affair, it was called. And the American public went ballistic at the possibility that the French would insist that we pay a bribe to them in order to negotiate with them. And all of the affection and support that we'd had for France went out the window because people were saying, hey, they are literally trying to bribe us into friendship. And everybody was moving toward war. It looked very likely as if there would be a war. And the French were surprised that bribery was the normal way of doing business. So the Congress was pushing for war. Adams, in the meantime, knew that we were not equipped to fight a war and was worried about Hamilton. So he got a signal from the French that they apologized, they would not demand a bribe. And he sent another delegation over there, and in the closing months of his administration, signed a treaty with France, which ended the threat of a war with France. And basically, at the end of the Adams administration, this threat that had hovered over America ever since our founding, of a war with Britain and then a war with France, was ended, and the U.S. was assured of a period of peaceful evolution. But the threat of the war led to a tremendous outbreak of fear and panic in the United States, and a real assault on our freedoms and our civil liberties called the Alien and Sedition Act. And that's what we'll talk about in tomorrow's video. Thanks a lot.